Today, we're celebrating yet another one of the American Journal of Epidemiology's most influential papers in the last 100 years, which is Relaxing the Rule of 10 Events Per Variable in Logistic and Cox Regression by Eric Biddinghoff and Chuck McCulloch. On behalf of the authorship team, I'm here today with Chuck McCulloch, professor of biostatistics in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. This is a paper that has had over 2,700 citations. It's one of the most top-cited papers in the history of the journal. So what prompted this paper?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really enjoy being a professor of biostatistics at UCSF is that I get to collaborate with so many brilliant colleagues. And there was this series of people that came and talked to me. And when we got down to talking about power and sample size, they would come to me and they'd say, well, there's this rule out there, this rule of 10 events per variable. And I have 6 variables, so I have to find 6 times 10, 60 readmissions to do my study, and that'll be enough, right? And I would say, well, no, I don't think that's right. I mean, let's sit down and talk about power and sample size choice and let's do this right. Mainly it depends on the size of the effect you're trying to detect. If it's a massive effect, you don't need a very big study. If you're looking for a little teeny effect, you need a big study. And the first thing, as a mathematician, I said, well, this rule has nothing to do with the size of the effect. So it can't possibly tell you what your sample size ought to be. It must be about something else. And that's what started us sort of digging into these original articles that had proposed this rule of thumb.
The focus of the paper really was on this rule of thumb. However, one of the most elegant things I believe about this paper is that you also lay out different permutations of options for thinking about power in terms of sample sizes, events per variable, which is the title of the paper. What was your thinking behind focusing on events per variable as the main argument of this paper?
When we read the original paper, we said, oh, this isn't about power and sample size, really. What it's about is when the entire statistical machinery, logistic regression or Cox regression, starts to break down and you can't depend on it anymore. That's what it's really about. And if you say, okay, I think that people who are discharged with high blood pressure are at higher risk for readmission. And I also think that people with high heart rates who are discharged are at high risk of readmission. So I think the important metric there that's going to determine readmission is the product of the two. Multiply heart rate times blood pressure. That's the magic predictor. Well, if you tried to write that in an article and that's all you published was the magic predictor was heart rate times blood pressure, the reviewers would say, wait a minute, how do we know they're not each important? How do we know it's only the product of the two that's important? And so we actually went into this, and I think part of our takeaway message is it's not just events per variable.
What were your expectations for how this paper would influence the field of epi?
Because we recognized that the original paper had been misinterpreted on many occasions, we tried to be very careful in writing out exactly what this did and didn't say, and to write it in a way that said, if you're in this situation, this is when you should feel comfortable. So that, and to try to make that information readily accessible to the reader. And as we all know, readers often look at the beginning of an article and the end of the article and don't spend, an excruciating amount of detail looking at everything in between. And so we try to make it really clear what our takeaway message was. And I think that's helped to make it more influential than it might otherwise have been.
Are there other rules of thumb that you would still love to tackle?
When I see people misinterpreting things that are published in the literature or that are statistical, I like to try to get to the bottom of it. Is it because it wasn't well written? Is it because it's not accessible? Is it because there was something wrong with the original research? And I always find that I have the most fun when things I dive into have already come to me a couple times. And therefore, I feel pretty confident are going to have an impact on the use of statistics in public health research. As a biostatistician, I'm often, one step behind the scenes. So, I really enjoy the fact that, I get to collaborate with all these researchers, but the people that get the headlines are always the primary researchers, the epidemiologists, the public health researchers. So I feel really honored that as a biostatistician, we get, Eric and I are both biostatisticians, that we get a little piece of the recognition for our contributions.
And the recognition is well deserved. Again, thank you on behalf of the American Journal of Epidemiology for this contribution and for the enduring contributions it makes to all of our work. Congratulations.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
And thank you.
Thank you.